19% of 3 to 5-year-olds in the UK now own a smartphone. 97% of 13 to 15-year-olds have one, and 95% use social media. Almost every secondary student walking into school is carrying a device that connects them to the entire world, and the entire world to them. And from February 2026, schools in England are expected to operate as mobile phone-free environments.
The draft KIPC 2026 guidance now explicitly names deepfakes as peer-on-peer abuse. AI safety standards are tightened. Filtering expectations are higher. But here's the question underneath all that. Department for Science, Innovation and Technology new parent survey shows that while 80% of parents feel confident they know the platforms their child uses, only 24% feel very confident about the content their child actually sees. So when something goes wrong online, do parents feel equipped before it happens? Welcome back to Being the Head, the human cost of leading schools. I'm Jackie.
And I'm Jane, and today's conversation sits right at the intersection of safeguarding, leadership and parental trust, because digital life is no longer an add-on, it's embedded in every safeguarding decision leaders make. And we're really pleased to be joined by Amit, founder of For Working Parents, a former deputy head teacher, ICF-trained coach and creator of the viral periodic table of emojis. But his work isn't just about decoding symbols. It's about helping parents understand the digital world their children inhabit and building relationships strong enough to hold those conversations.
And Amit brings lived experience, bereavement, parenting through medical uncertainty, and an adult ADHD diagnosis. This isn't theoretical, it's real.
Welcome, Amit. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, I'm well, thank you.
Okay, so before we come into our leadership conversation with you, we're going to quickly look at the headlines. So we're looking at the leadership landscape educational settings are currently navigating. Schools are expected to be phone-free environments, and Ofcom data shows that 97% of our 13 to 15-year-olds own smartphones. The draft KIPC 2026 update recognises deepfakes as abuse, and the DfE IA safety standards require monitoring, filtering and safeguarding alerts. And the DSIT's Media Literacy Action Plan commits to a national kids online safety hub for parents. So digital life isn't peripheral to leadership, it's embedded into it.
But policy doesn't raise children. Parents do. And DSIT's research shows that 1 in 4 parents struggle to talk to their child about online content because they don't know what their child is seeing. That's where today's conversation lies.
So, Amit, it's over to you now. So we've got a raft of questions that we'd like to ask you. Amit, let's launch into our set of questions for you. So as expectations increase around the filtering and AI compliance, how can leaders avoid becoming the digital police, and I'm using that as a phrase, instead of becoming those trusted partners with parents?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think there is a role to play for schools in becoming that, in inverted commas, digital police. I also don't like that phrase very much. But I think schools have a role to play to educate children on what the tech world looks like. There is a future in tech, of course. AI is here to stay. AI has changed the world for so many of us, in many ways for the better. But of course, there are lots of negative sides of AI, whether it's deepfakes, whether it's companionship therapy, and I'm sure we'll explore some of those throughout this podcast. But I think the key thing here is to triangulate this relationship. I think we are, from what I'm seeing in the work that I do, we're living in an industry where people are passing off the responsibility to each other. I think a lot of school leaders think that it's not their responsibility, it's parents' responsibility. Parents think actually schools need to be doing this because we're out of our depth. Some of them think that the government needs to take stronger action, and social media companies need to regulate better. So it's this kind of mismatch that we're in as to who is responsible for keeping our young children safe. The problem that I've got is the more we have these debates and discussions, which, by the way, here in the UK we're brilliant at. We will debate. I mean, I think it's been 30 years debating the third runway at Heathrow, and not a single slab of concrete or tarmac has been laid yet. So, the problem while we debate and discuss is that more and more children are encountering harm. We've seen it from some of the court rulings that have come out of America, in which they have, said that Meta and other platforms have encouraged harm to young people. So if we know that that is there, we know that social media platforms and lots of things online are intentionally, and I use that word carefully, but intentionally causing our children harm because they want our children on their platforms, whose responsibility is it then to keep our children safe? And I think actually we need to look at this societally and holistically. It's not okay to just say, it's on you, parents. You need to be better at this. You need to be more responsible for this. I see a lot of that, by the way, on social media, where people are laying blame squarely at the foot of parents. It's also not just schools' responsibility. School leaders and schools and safeguarding leads can only do so much, but I think the education has to continue, and we educate our young people. We don't do it as a one-off assembly a year where it's a bit of e-safety training. We embed it into our curriculum. We talk about this in geography. We talk about it in history. We talk about misinformation, disinformation. We talk about AI imagery and AI videos. If we can be creative, let's bring it into maths. Let's embed it into all of our all of our subjects, really. And let's make sure that that relationship between parents and schools is one that is positive. So, for example, I've seen some great practice, and I was doing it when I was in education, a separate digital safeguarding newsletter. And I know that not all parents read newsletters. I know that not all parents check their emails, but, lots of schools have different ways of communicating now with parents. Let's dedicate something to digital safeguarding. Let's make digital safeguarding as important, if not more important, dare I say it, than wider safeguarding, because I think a lot of the things that safeguarding leads deal with actually have an online element to them. So I think it's about triangulating. I think it's about getting all stakeholders involved. And I think it's about looking at this holistically rather than in silos.
Yeah. And I think just picking up, it does need to be a collective debate, but I think it's moving on from debate. And I think it needs to be around collective education. I know from experience as a head teacher, trying to keep up to date, trying to keep up with my own children and the pupils was difficult. And I think that's what parents were finding, is that they can't, I think it's educating the adults, and it's how we go about educating the adults in order for them to appropriately educate collectively the pupils. I mean, have you got any ideas on how that can happen? Because I know as a head teacher, we used to have Internet Safety Week, we used to have the parent workshops, but trying to get parents into school to those workshops, it was always the parents that came to everything that, you were talking to you were preaching to the choir, people that would, it was those hard to reach parents that never actually engaged. Have you got any tips for our listeners who are perhaps engaging that on how they could address that or flip that on its head?
Yeah, so actually, a lot of the work that I do, what I do for a living now as a digital parenting or digital safeguarding specialist, is work with parents in particular. So I work with corporate organisations that have parent networks and want to support their parents. A lot of those parents obviously have children at schools. All of them, most of them have children at schools. And so, that is part of the educational process. I would love to see more workplaces, more organisations getting people like me in to deliver sessions on a regular basis about some of the key harms that exist online. I also work with schools and colleges, so I go in to schools, and the way I work with schools, actually, again, it's I don't like coming in and just delivering to students. I think if I'm coming into a school, I want to spend the entire day at a school, and I want to tackle all the stakeholders. And what I mean by that is a day running workshops for students about their own digital footprint and harms that might be caused to them and what harm looks like and what to do about it. But then it's CPD for staff, so I run digital safeguarding CPD for staff, because the number of teachers that I speak to who have absolutely no idea about the things that I'm talking about. And I'm not saying I'm not blaming teachers for that, because like you say, teachers are now taking on more and more responsibility. And most teachers get into the business to just teach history, for goodness sake. I just want to go in there and teach history. I then have to do the pastoral stuff. I then have to do the co-curricular stuff. I then have to now do the digital stuff. And, you're sort of trying to teach teachers all of these things that they didn't necessarily sign up for. So I work and do CPD with staff, and then I run the parent sessions. And I always say to schools, actually, it's up to you how you run the parent sessions. If you want me to do it in your school hall at 7 p.m, because that's when you get most parents, I'll do it in your school hall at 7 p.m. If you want to do it at 8:30 in the morning as a breakfast, because more parents come in then, we'll do it that way. If you want to do it at 6 p.m. as a virtual, because you'll get more parents logging in virtually, we'll do it that way. You can record what I do. You can send it out to your parents via all the channels that you have. And I know that parental engagement is a problem. I've been there. I've done it. You always have the parents that you don't necessarily need sitting in the hall. That's great, by the way. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. But the hard to reach ones, we've got to be creative in the way that we reach them. Do we have a digital safeguarding newsletter? Do we have a school podcast, for example? I started a school podcast when I was an assistant head teacher about some of these key topics that, a lot of parents were actually listening to. Do we send literature home with students themselves to say, give this to your parents? We've got to try different things. I worry that some schools that I've spoken to and some school leaders that I've spoken to almost see it as, yeah, we can't get hold of these parents, so we've just stopped trying. And I get it. I get why you do that, because it's exhausting when you put so much work into running a workshop that you think is brilliant and it's going to really be meaningful, and you have 10 parents turn up, 9 of which are parents that already are doing this stuff and are already on top of it. So I get that. But I think we've got to be creative in how we access our parents, how we reach our parents. And I think you've got to get people in on a regular basis. And, it's easy for me to say because I'm in this world, but if I was a head teacher, and I would really have debates internally about, I need to employ an IT teacher, but at the same time I also need to invest in digital safeguarding. I think in this current climate that we're in, dare I say it, I would rather invest more money in making sure our children are looked after from a digital point of view, whether it's training, whether it's support, whatever it might be. But I really think we need to do a lot more than an e-safety session, an e-safety assembly that talks about, Snapchat is bad because of this. I mean, which kid is going to really care about somebody that looks like me coming in and saying, Snapchat is bad, don't use it? We've got to talk to the kids in their language. Then when you deliver CPD for staff, it's about what should you be looking out for? Because lots of staff that I talk to, they pick up on language, they're hearing things in the classroom, they're seeing things on children's screens sometimes, and they don't recognize or realize that it could be part of a bigger safeguarding issue. So they don't report it. They don't report language. They don't report seeing emojis on a child's phone. They don't report acronyms that they hear. They don't report sometimes sexist behavior or sexist language. They'll just say kind of, stop saying that. That's inappropriate. But if you report it as a safeguarding thing, you don't know if your DSL has actually got a big picture here of lots of sexist language from lots of different teachers, which could suggest that this young lad, if it is a lad, is being influenced negatively in the manosphere. We've got to be more. I think some staff are a bit worried about reporting things on CPOMs, and my concern, because DSL sometimes get bombarded and they say, actually, that's a behavioural issue. You've got to report it behaviourally. So some teachers just think, I'm going to get into trouble here, so I better not report it. So I think we've got to create a culture in schools where teachers know what to report, how to report it, why they're reporting it, and DSLs are also supported. I am a big advocate, by the way, for not just having a designated safeguarding lead, so you have a DSL in a school, but you also have a designated digital safeguarding lead that works hand in hand with the DSL, that takes on some of the load from the DSL, that is more about the digital aspects. And so you've got 2 people in a school that are dealing primarily with the different aspects of safeguarding.
I think, Amit, what you're talking about there is about educating the educators, really, isn't it? If I think about my own experience of the digital world, I mean, Jane and I had to learn a lot about podcasting. We went out and we searched and researched. We hadn't got a clue what to do to start off with. But if I think about my own teenage son and me on my phone, he'll snatch it off me because I don't do it as quickly as he does it. And, how can you not know this? And I feel really inadequate sometimes about my knowledge of the digital world as a parent, but also as somebody who knows that we are working in a world and preparing children for a digital world we really don't know much about. And I think that is the fear factor that we have to get over, I think, in education, is actually there is a lot more out there that we don't really know.
I think that's true. And I think a lot of parents are just fearful. And I think when you're fearful of something you don't know, it's easier not to worry about it or not to learn about it, because you're worried about, A, the amount you have to invest, the amount of time you have to invest in it, and B, you're worried about sometimes what you might actually encounter. And then you've got to have difficult conversations with your children who are already too far in terms of smartphones and devices and iPads and whatever. And it's a battle that you think actually sometimes isn't worth fighting. But the things that I put out on my own socials, and the irony is not lost on me, by the way. I campaign against all the harms of social media for young people, yet all my work is on social media. I see myself as a bit of an anti-influencer. I post resources all the time, and I'm always happy for school leaders, for parents, for anybody that works in this space to nab those resources and share them. I create them for a reason. I create them to educate and upskill parents. And I think in this day and age, what I say to parents when I'm running, if I'm speaking at a corporate organization or at a school or at a community, wherever I'm speaking and there's parents at an event, at a conference, I always say to parents, actually, if you've got children now, no matter how old they are, whether they are just born or whether they are teenagers or even if they're young adults, they have been raised in this digital world because social media has been around for the best part of the last 20 or so years. We have an obligation now as parents to become educated and upskilled on what's going on out there. Now, that doesn't mean, so I have a periodic table of emojis, as you mentioned. I also have a periodic table of apps, and I talk about lots of apps, and I talk about lots of trends. I'm not saying parents and educators have to know about all of those trends or have to know about all of those apps. The key thing is, if you see an app on your child's phone and you have no idea what that app is, that should be an intervention for you to research that app a bit more. Look into it, find out what it does. Why has your child got it? What is the research about it? Is it safe? Is it potentially harmful? And then pluck up the courage to have a conversation with your child about what that app is, why your child's got that app. And also, have you got the programs on your own phone? Simple things like Google Family Link, which alerts you as a parent to an app your child is trying to download. And rather than saying no, because that's the easy thing to do, it's let's research this app together. Tell me why you want this app. Who's on this app that you need to be on it? Well, the research isn't looking too good. Oh gosh, there's risks of grooming or there's risks of harmful content. I think it's better off you don't have it, because you will know. When you empower young people to be part of the decision-making process, they're much more likely to accept the decision, not necessarily agree with it, but accept it, rather than it being an arbitrary kind of no. So I always talk to parents about creating a digital charter, and I always say that when we give our children devices, I don't know why, but this brick wall gets built between us and them. It just happens, and children become very secretive about their online world. And what our job as parents is, and educators and carers, is to slowly but surely, brick by brick, bring that wall down. And the only way we can do that is to be curious, to be non-judgmental, to have conversations, to show children that we're walking the digital path with them. Obviously, in my ideal world, children wouldn't have smartphones and social media companies would be banned from accessing them. That is what I campaign for. But I recognize, as you gave the stats at the beginning, the vast majority of children have smartphones. We can't just hand over a device and say, good luck, because I genuinely believe the digital world is more harmful to our children than the physical world.
You talked a little bit there, Amit, about the periodic table that you created, and it went viral, didn't it? I mean, what did you find from that? What did you think parents were most shocked to discover?
Parents were absolutely shocked, and teachers, by the way. I had people from all over the world requesting that. I mean, it was featured in media. It was translated into Spanish, Portuguese. It was crazy.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest shock for parents and teachers was how little they knew about what emojis could potentially mean. And I made it very clear when I posted that context matters. I'm not saying that every time you see a hedgehog on your child's phone that it means your child is being groomed by neo-Nazi gangs. That's not what I'm saying. It could just be a hedgehog. Or it might mean, that comment was a bit prickly. But there's lots of different meanings to emojis. But the point that I was making with that periodic table is, if you see emojis on your children's phone that you don't recognize, especially if they're lined up next to each other and you think, gosh, what on earth does that mean? That's an opportunity to have a conversation with your child. What does that mean? What are those emojis representing? Talk to me about it. Or research it yourself. What could these emojis potentially mean? Because we know gangs often use emojis, and young people use emojis to communicate with gangs. They make up entire sentences, whether it's county lines, drugs, whether it's other types of youth gangs. We know the manosphere uses emojis to represent sort of membership of them. So we know that they can be used in sinister ways. But the key thing about that periodic table is, it's not that every time your child uses one of those emojis, it's a bad thing. It's context, but it's having those conversations, and it's recognizing. I mean, that periodic table now is a year old. A lot of those emojis will have changed. A lot of new emojis will be used for different things. So it's keeping up to date with some of those things. It's not knowing everything. We cannot know everything, but it's about being curious about the kind of things that your children are doing online, are exposed to online. Talk to them about something you've researched. Gosh, I saw an article today about Snapchat and these features about Snapchat that are really bad. Did you know this? And, get your child engaged. And of course, the first time you do it, your child's going to say, Mum, get lost. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not talking to you about it. What do you know? But the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. And it's like anything, the more you talk to your children about a topic, the more they'll open up about it. And I'm also a digital parenting coach. So I coach a lot of parents around reducing screen time and without conflict and building this digital charter, which is basically a set of expectations. I have a template for these set of expectations, and I don't call them rules intentionally. You'll know what happens when you use the word rules, either or in school. So we call them expectations. We build the charter together, so your children are involved in building that charter, no matter how old they are. And dare I say it, parenting in the modern age, there is the art of compromise now. And often when I talk to parents and I say to them, there's a bit of compromise, they say to me, goodness me, if I ever said to my dad, I want to compromise, I'd get a clip round the ear and I'd be thrown out the door and told not to come back. And of course, I always say to parents, comparing your childhood to your children's is a complete irrelevance. They don't care about your childhood. They don't care about how hard you had it because they don't know what it was like to live without the digital world. They don't know what it was like to live potentially in poverty, because a lot of parents talk about, certainly in my culture, we'll talk about, when we were young, we didn't have this. Our parents didn't have money. They were working class, out day and night working, and I didn't have all of this, and you've got a phone and your children don't care. You're not doing anything other than putting bricks into that wall that I talked about. So the 4 questions that I say to parents that you should always ask your children, the classic question, and I'm guilty of this, my children are only young and I'm sometimes guilty of this: how was school today? What a terrible question, because what you end up getting is a grunt, a shrug of the shoulders, it was fine. Where do you go from that? Where do you take the question next? Let's look at your timetable. You had a geography today. How was it? No. I've told you how school was today. I'm not answering any more questions. So we've got to move that conversation on. And if your child is online and they have a device and it connects them to the online world, there's 4 questions I always say you have to ask. Number 1, how was your online world today? Number 2, did you see anything online today that made you feel uncomfortable? Number 3, did anybody send you anything online today that you didn't like? And number 4, did you send anything to anybody online today that maybe you shouldn't have done? And the reason for those questions is because the first 3 in particular, you're showing curiosity in their online world. You're showing that you're coming from a place of care. And if they've seen something uncomfortable, you want to know about it and you want to talk to them about it. And the 4th question is also teaching children about self-regulation and about responsibility, because we know we can't always see, sadly, our children as potential victims. In a number of cases, our children are perpetrators of trolling, of inappropriate comments, of sharing inappropriate content. So we've got to approach that from a non-judgmental point of view. And listen, on day 1, you're going to get grunts to all of those questions. On day 10, you're going to get grunts. You might even get grunts on day 100. But I've worked with parents who've come to me and said, actually, you know what? I didn't even ask the question today. My daughter came to me and said, I saw something online and I didn't like it. Can we have a chat about it? And what a beautiful moment that is, because that is that wall collapsing and coming down, and your child is coming to you as a parent and saying, something about my online world is off. It might be pornographic, and children don't want to talk to their parents about porn, and many parents don't want to talk to their children about porn. And so it ends up being this kind of, we'll just hope for the best. I'm sure you're watching it, I'm sure you're seeing it, but let's just hope that what you're seeing is not harmful, it's not violent, it's not dangerous, it's not promoting misogyny or whatever, and we'll just hope for the best. But we've got to have those conversations, and those 4 questions really help towards building an environment where parents are the safe space. You'll know that when you have a safeguarding issue where the digital world is involved and you tell parents, anecdotally, from my experience as being a safeguarding lead, anecdotally, 90% of the time that I would tell parents about a safeguarding issue related to the online world, they would turn around and say to me, I had absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea my child was doing this. I didn't even know my child had Snapchat. What is Snapchat? I don't even know how it works. And you're sitting there thinking, oh my God, this has been going on for months and months and months, and you've had no idea about it. So that's the gap we really need to fill. And that comes from the education piece, but it also comes from helping parents know how to have those conversations and recognizing they have to have them on a daily basis.
Yeah, the DSIT did focus quite a lot on that generation gap, didn't they, that we have got. And I know from my own experience, you have to work very hard to keep up with it because it's constantly moving. It's like a snowball, isn't it? It's going down the hill all the time, and you can't. It's just going to get bigger and bigger until you address it. I have had an experience where my daughter has actually said to me, "I wish I'd grown up in your generation."
Wow.
Because we didn't have it. And it just knocks really home to you when you have somebody that says that. And you really look at it. I wish I'd grown up in your generation because we didn't have all this digital content and these mobile phones.
It's fascinating, actually, because the more and more young people I speak to today, the more and more actually say that they would welcome the idea of not having smartphones. They would welcome the idea of a potential social media ban. Of course, the majority are still very much attached to their devices and social media, and they can't think of a world without it. But I think those that have encountered harm, experienced harm on whatever scale, some will experience terrible harm, and some will experience, a little bit of harm. But I think they recognize that, gosh, what life might be like without these devices, without that FOMO element, without those dopamine crashes, without checking notifications at 1 o'clock in the morning and then waking up really groggy and taking it out on everybody. And so, yeah, I'm a big campaigner, certainly for schools. I mean, I don't like this language from the DFE about schools need to be phone free, because I think that's very vague and it doesn't mean anything. And I've visited too many schools where they would argue that they're phone free. You walk around the corridor and children are on their phones.
Mhm.
It's more a case of, I don't want to see it, and whatever happens around the corridor happens. I want to see I want to see schools absolutely phone free. How they do that, I don't know, because there are whole debates around pouches, and some people don't like pouches, brick phones, and leaving them at home. Whatever it is, we've got to be creative as school leaders. We've got to A, see this as a priority. Some school leaders don't see this as a priority, so we've got to see it as a priority. And B, we've got to be willing to fight this huge battle against parents, against children, and shape it and phrase it in a way that this is about your well-being. This is about what's good for you. I did it as an assistant head. We spent £20,000 on lockers. This is before the pouches were out. We spent, and before it became, dare I say, popular. This is back in 2019. So we invested it cost us 20 grand. We raised some money, bought lockers, put them into every form room, moved the timetable around. So we had form time in the morning and form time in the last thing of the day. Students locked their phones in the morning, got them in the afternoon. And I was there for another year after that. So we did some research at the end of that academic year with the children. And goodness me, well-being, mental health issues, cyberbullying was down. Anxiety was down. Children just felt happier. And of course, children found ways around it. They would bring in burner phones. They would say, I haven't got a phone, and secretly they have. So you're always going to find children that go around that. But you put in pretty stern measures to tackle those issues. But that's not a reason not to do it. The reason to do it is because the vast majority of children and staff are going to benefit it. Because what I find with staff on this battle is, let's say you and I are walking down the corridor and we both see a child on their phone. We know it's school policy that phones have to be confiscated. But you and I are both teachers. We don't have positions of responsibility. We're teachers, and you are maybe not prepared to take that battle on. You're a little bit vulnerable, or you're a little bit, I don't want to, this child, I know this child's never going to hand their phone over. I'm going to get a mouthful. I'm going to pretend I didn't see it. So you've walked past pretending you didn't see it. I'm of the other ilk. I'm going to say, I'm ready for this battle. I'm taking that phone. And then I take the phone and I come to you and I say, why didn't you confiscate the phone? And you say, I didn't see it. And then you end up getting in trouble because you're not following school policy. So what we've ended up doing is we create an inconsistent pattern in schools. We put teachers under immense pressure to follow these rules, and they get into trouble when they don't follow them. But we've got to realize that not every teacher is able to have those kind of really difficult, in many cases, confrontations. You try and take a phone off a child. I mean, we've all been there, I'm sure. Goodness me, it's a battle. I mean, some give them over willingly and you think, thank God for that. And others, it's a standoff in the middle of 600 kids, and you're thinking, well, I'm going to lose this now, aren't I? I'm going to lose face here in front of 600 kids. But you've got to follow those policies. So I think if we get rid of that altogether, you've made school an immediately better environment, not only for the kids, but for the teachers too.
It's about culture, isn't it? It's not the compliance element of it, which is what you're talking about. It's about developing the culture and a confidence and a buy-in that everybody's following that culture because they can see the benefits of it. And I think it's going back to that instantaneous fix. There's been a lot of articles over the last couple of weeks how a lot of the younger generations are moving over to the old, what I call them, the brick phones, the Nokia phones. So it's that sort of smartphone element is going, but also sort of the use of cameras. They're going back to the old fashioned, well, I call old fashioned, digital cameras, the film cameras. because they don't want that instant hit. They're enjoying that journey, which for us, well, I don't know about you, Amit, but certainly for me and Jackie, we'd take the photos, you'd take the reel, and you'd wait ages for these photos. And then when you get the photos back from the developers, you're really disappointed that you've taken a picture or it's blurred. But that's what they're wanting, because I think they're so fed up of being on and visual to everybody all the time. It's exhausting. It must be absolutely exhausting for them.
It really is. It really is. And I think a lot of young people are just thinking, I can't deal with this anymore. The constant harm, the algorithm showing them such harmful content. We've got a huge rise in body image issues in girls, eating disorders in young people. A lot of that's linked to excessive smartphone usage and social media. We've got the rise of some pretty awful influencers who are making lots of money at the expense of our children. We've got social media platforms that are now being, shown to not have done enough or not doing enough to protect our children. We've got games as well that encourage, toxic behaviors, horrible language. And then we've got the issue of online grooming. Sadly, we've made this space so much easier for predators to access our children. And I've spoken to victims of grooming, and I've spoken to parents who have tragically lost children as a result of the online world and grooming and trends and those kind of things. And, hearing their stories, it's heartbreaking to think. And a lot of parents, maybe we're all guilty of this. We always think it can never happen to my child because we're a bit on it. Our house, we're a bit streetwise, we're a bit savvy. We know what's going on until it does happen to your child. Because the truth is, this doesn't discriminate. It doesn't discriminate by gender. It doesn't discriminate by faith. I've spoken to people of faith who say, no, our house is a religious home. God is part of our home, and therefore my child is not watching pornography. Let me tell you something. Your child is definitely watching pornography. They're definitely seeing pornography. They may or may not be actively searching for it, but they're seeing it. And you have a choice now as a parent. You can pretend that it's not existing and they're not watching it and ignore it. Or you can address it and have a conversation, because porn, as we know, is so easily accessible. And I think, sometimes when I speak to dads, in particular, I often say a lot of the reason why dads struggle to talk to their children about porn is because I think a lot of us dads struggle to deal with our own relationship with porn. And that is part of the problem, because porn is so easily accessible. It becomes a bit difficult to talk to your children about porn when so many dads are watching it on a regular basis, but not necessarily willing to acknowledge that or willing to sort of be open about that. And I think that's part of the issue. How do I talk to my son about porn when actually I'm watching it all the time as well? And do I then try and be the cool dad and say, let's watch porn together? Or do I be the hypocritical dad and say, what you're watching is disgusting, but then I put my computer on? And I've spoken to children who have gone through their parents' laptops and seen a whole history of pornography, and it becomes a real difficult conversation to have, but it's such an important conversation, because you'll know the research from the Children's Commissioner about accessibility to porn. The average age of porn consumption is 13. 10%, I think it's gone up to 20% now, of 9-year-olds have seen pornography. That's a year 5 student, and they're not necessarily searching for it. They're seeing it on Twitter or X, which I think was the number one platform. They're seeing it on Snapchat. They're seeing it on WhatsApp. People are sharing pornography on WhatsApp. So, we need to be having these conversations with our children, both as parents, but also I think schools have a responsibility to be tackling this issue as well.
Absolutely.
Do you think there's a wider issue around prams now having slots for phones, and so you can rest your tablet on this? So there's a whole new industry growing up around actually. At a very young age, these children are exposed to digital content. But we seem to have the policy and procedures in place for school-age children. And actually, we need to catch this a lot earlier and put some legislation. If you were in that position, Amit, if you were in a policy position, what would you advise on that issue?
Well, just before that, actually, because I work historically, primarily my work has been with secondary schools, but I get so many more inquiries now from primary schools to come in and talk to the children, CPD for staff and parents, because I think primary school leaders are seeing this problem filter down, and children are getting devices much earlier. Children are getting smartphones much earlier, tablets much earlier. Yeah, that pram thing, you can walk in your local shopping centre and see a raft of parents with prams and their children watching Peppa Pig and a beautiful kind of thing attached to their pram, which fits the iPad in perfectly. And mum and dad are able to then shop and go to a restaurant and have a meal and a glass of wine whilst children are just engaged. So I think that in itself is a massive problem. Being screen-free at home is very difficult. I know it because we are screen-free at home. And it's also difficult when you're pushing back against schools which really buy into EdTech. Now, that might be a separate conversation. I've got a big problem with EdTech as well, because I think if EdTech isn't benefiting the child, which in most cases it isn't, I don't think it should be in school. I don't like EdTech that benefits parents or teachers. And I say this as a former teacher, so I say that carefully. But EdTech needs to benefit the child. And the problem with a lot of EdTech is it's gamified. So a lot of the maths stuff is like, complete these challenges and unlock this and you'll get this, and you gamify things and it creates more of that addiction element. So there's a whole conversation to be had there about that. But from a policy point of view, the government has brought in guidance now about under fives not having access to the devices and all of that. Guidance is great. Guidance is important. We should have guidance.
But how do you police it?
Well, this is the thing. How do you make sure that guidance is being filtered? Because if it's on the BBC's homepage and I don't read the BBC, or if it's on the DFE's website and I don't know how to find the DFE's website, or if it's a graphic that's been put on a couple of social media pages and I don't follow those pages, how do I get hold of that? How do I know? But more importantly, how do I know why my 5-year-old shouldn't have a device? Because for me as a parent, I think about parents that I've spoken to who are maybe single parents who are holding down 2 jobs and they're really busy, or parents that have 4 or 5 children and it's, giving a device over is easy. This isn't about judging. I've got 3 children and we're screen free. It is damn hard. It is overwhelming sometimes for us as parents to manage that. Yes, they watch TV in the living room and they're allowed to watch YouTube Kids and things like that, but they don't have their own devices. So we can't say to them, bugger off and just go on your iPad and whatever. We as a family, we don't really go for dinners anymore to restaurants because we know it's just going to be chaos, because our 3 kids who are 5, 3 and 1 are not going to be able to, exactly, they're not going to be able to sit down at a dinner table and focus on the meal. So we just don't do it. That's a sacrifice that we've made. We go on long car journeys and we listen to music through the radio and we entertain them with games because we don't want them having their own devices. It is hard. And for some parents, it's overwhelming. So I think it's really about educating those parents that, this short-term gain that you are getting from your children being distracted and you being able to do work is potentially going to cause a lot of long-term pain, because when that child is 9, 10, 11, 15, and you're trying to get them off that device, you're going to be facing a really tough battle. Or when they're seeing harmful content, you're going to ask yourself, gosh, how did they get this? So I think it's a really difficult thing, but I think we've got to, again, be creative. That guidance, for example, has it gone out in different languages? Is it in community places? Is it in places of worship? Because I know from my own community, people that maybe where English isn't first language, they come from different countries and they just think the device is what everybody has. It's this false societal construct that we've allowed to go through. Everyone's got one, so my child has to get one. I don't want my child to be left out. Are we accessing everybody, and are we giving them the research, and are we telling them the why? So my policy, would be actually a social media ban for under 16s, but the language is banning social media companies from accessing our children. And I know at the time of recording this podcast, just a couple of days ago, MPs again voted against ban. They want to get this consultation through, but again, this consultation is not due till the end of May. And there are lots of opinions about bans, and I respect those. I know people in the same space as me don't support a ban, and I respect that. I think a ban is important, but I think we've got to do much more than just a ban. It's not going to solve all the problems. The education has to continue. We have to hold social media's companies to account. But I feel like we're on this precipice now where the tide is shifting a bit. I think some parents now are recognizing the harms that have been intentionally caused to their children. But I think for many parents, they just feel it's too late to do anything about it.
I don't think it's ever too late. What you've got 73% of secondary school teachers reporting that pupils are using AI tools for homework. But what about those really vulnerable children that are using it, asking for those questions like that? Where do we go from there? And I'm not bashing AI, because used appropriately and effectively, it does help. I use it in my business, but I am in charge of the information that's going in, and I am using it as a sounding board in a sense, but I've got control over that. How are we going to address that whole issue?
That's great. And AI, I think, is a whole different kettle of fish, because I'm not sure it's going to be covered under a lot of this legislation. It sort of almost needs its own legislation, doesn't it? And you're right. I've seen case studies of children using AI for therapy. I've also seen a case study from America about ChatGPT encouraging a young lad to commit suicide, and tragically he did. And it was only after the authorities were able to get through to ChatGPT's history, you just see streams and streams of, and parents were obviously devastated. I've also seen case studies of young people getting into intimate relationships with AI because maybe they're struggling in real life to talk to girls if they're a boy, or to boys if they're a girl, or same sex. And so instead they turn to AI because, as you'll know, with things like ChatGPT, if you say something simple like create me a presentation for tectonic boundaries, it'll create a presentation for you, but then you'll say, oh, you didn't include constructive plate boundaries. What it will then say is, you're absolutely right for calling that out, or it'll use language like that, really sort of language that, and for kids, they're asking very simple questions. I'm feeling really down today. And that just spirals then into this kind of, how can I help you? How can I support you? I was in a secondary school about a month ago. They asked me to come in because some of the older children, when Grok had come about and was allowing people to basically nudify anybody, students had used their phones. So again, a problem with phones in schools, had taken pictures of teachers, male and female, were then nudifying their teachers. Not only that, they were creating pictures where teachers were basically snogging students. Now, you imagine the reputational damage. I mean, you imagine as head teachers, if you got an image sent to you and you, at the first instance, didn't know if it was real or not, you would initially think, gosh, this teacher's in big trouble here. What's going on here? And then you'd learn it's an AI deepfake and you think, gosh, how in my school have we allowed children to think that this is okay? So I did some training for the students on deepfakes. I talked to them about the new law which the government rushed in February, which is about the sharing of deepfakes without adult consent, because children are already protected in law. We know we can't share inappropriate images of children. That's been in law for a long time. But adults were not really protected with this whole deepfake and revenge porn kind of thing. So now we've got legislation which says you can't share deepfakes, sexualized deepfakes, without adult consent. So then I did some CPD for staff to ask them, how did you not know this was happening? What were the signs that this could be happening? How can we pick up on it on future? What can we do about AI and deepfakes? How can we educate a bit more? Then I did some sessions with parents. I did a session with the parents at that same school, and we used the hall. They said to me, we want you in the hall, and we want to do, we've set up about 60 chairs. We think it'll be a popular session. I had 2 parents turn up to that session. The school was unable to get more parents in. So 2 parents turned up to that session. I did the session. I asked them, I said, look, do you still want me to do the session? I mean, you've obviously paid me for it. I'm more than happy to do it. I can go home and we can do it virtually on another day and you might get more. But they said, no, let's do it. So I did it for those 2 parents. I ran through all the content that I wanted to go through in the hope that they in their WhatsApp groups might filter some of this information out, might encourage people to listen to some of the bits that I'm saying. So AI is this whole new world that we're in, and we've got to balance it with teaching children how to use it safely and appropriately, because there are lots of positives to AI and lots of great things that AI can do for us. But at the same time, we've got to teach children about the pitfalls, the dangers, the harms of it, and also about the complete inappropriate use of it.
Oh, you've spoken about your diagnosis of ADHD in later life, and the digital world is engineered for stimulation. So how does that intersect with attention and identity, especially for those neurodiverse children?
This is interesting because whenever I post things about sort of banning phones in schools and children not having smartphones, I often get a bit of pushback from people that work in this space. So maybe neurodivergent speakers or people that run neurodivergent organizations, or indeed Senkos in schools, who say actually devices are a kind of godsend for a lot of children that are neurodiverse, because it allows them to sort of regulate. There are platforms on those devices that give them access to things that they otherwise wouldn't have. And I have an internal battle with this issue, because my thinking is what we're saying with that argument is that the very platforms that are causing neurodivergent children harm are the ones that we then use to deregulate those same children from the harm that has been caused by those platforms. So I don't see by the idea that neurodivergent children need devices. That's not to say in the SEND department we shouldn't have computers which have access to things that will help them deregulate. But I don't feel that children who are neurodivergent in school need to have their mobile phones as a kind of special dispensation. And I think that is, again, a societal construct that we've allowed ourselves to fall into, because we've seen children deregulate when they're on their devices, because of course they are. They're distracted. They're playing games. They're doing something. They're on a platform or on a program that is designed to deregulate. But they can do that in the SEND department on a computer. They don't need their device for that. Yeah, I talk about that a lot in my sessions with parents, because we know that there are more and more diagnoses of neurodivergence, because we're more aware of ADHD, we're more aware of autism, we're more willing to talk about it. So, somebody that looks like me as a turban-wearing Sikh man talking about ADHD in my own community is, I get people looking at me thinking, what the hell is ADHD? And language is important, because if I'm doing a talk in my mother tongue, let's say in my local community or in my local Gurdwara, the temple, there are words that are not translatable into my mother tongue Punjabi. So neurodivergence, there's no such word for that. So when you talk about ADHD in my language, you talk about it almost as a disease of the brain. And of course, when you say that in English, how ridiculous is that? Because I have ADHD and I do not have a disease of the brain. But that is the kind of translation into my language. So it's how do we talk about it more, but also how do we explain to parents that it doesn't mean that they need devices more so than any other, or their own devices more so than any other child would. If you want them on a laptop, it could be a supervised laptop, your laptop in the lounge, where your child might be able to deregulate and access platforms that are genuinely meaningful for them. But I don't think they need their own devices because of it.
And that's going to be a debate, I think, that's going to go on and on and on unless we get more parents educated around this as well. And
I know parents in my community who, you've only got to look at their child and you can see that child is potentially autistic. Sometimes it's easier to spot in some children than it is in others. But those parents will absolutely not acknowledge that. And I really feel for that child then, because an acknowledgement would really help that child understand themselves, but also get the support that they need to be able to thrive in the same way that a neurotypical child would thrive. But there is still this stigma in certain cultures around, no, my children are fine. We're not accepting any ADHD diagnosis or autism or dyslexia, dyspraxia. We're not having it. We are, strong. And then you think, oh, no, that's so sad for that child, because that child's going to grow up in a world that isn't necessarily tailored for him or her, and you're not giving that child the support they need to actually be able to thrive. Because we know that autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, dyspraxic children can absolutely thrive if given the right support. But if we're not talking about it, if we're not acknowledging it, then we've got a problem. And that's part of why I do what I do. So I've got all the work that I do in the kind of digital parenting, digital safeguarding space, but I'm also a storyteller. So I share my story about losing my mum to ovarian cancer, about my daughter being born with 3 holes in her heart, and about my ADHD journey, because I think it's important that people see people that look like me acknowledging vulnerability. And I think we need to see vulnerability as a strength, not as a weakness. And, even in schools, if school leaders are looking for sort of keynote speakers at inset, we fill all of our insets with pedagogy, and we fill all of our insets with departmental time, and we fill all of our insets with exams and all of that kind of stuff, which is really important. But if we could get an hour into that inset of somebody coming in and sharing their story, because it helps you create that culture of compassion, of empathy. We know teachers are overworked, they're stressed out, but if we can help them create that culture of compassion and empathy where actually your story matters, doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't matter what your background is, your story matters. And if you're dealing with something at home, either with your children, with loved ones, with parents, with yourself, then we want to create a culture where you can talk about that openly and where we can try and support you through that. And so I think school leaders, that whole sort of well-being inclusion piece, I think is massive as well.
Yeah. Okay, Amit, last question. In 5 years' time, what will we regret not addressing now about children's digital lives?
Oh gosh, what a question. I think in the whole, I think we will regret not eradicating screens from schools. I think we will regret that. I think we will regret not removing social media and other platforms that harm children from their lives. I think if we don't take action, we will regret that massively. But those are 2 very big things. I think on the more granular level, I think we will regret not working with all stakeholders holistically to educate. I think we've got to educate ourselves. Head teachers don't have all the answers. There might be head teachers listening to this who might think they're expected to have the answers because they're the head teacher. But actually, it's okay to say, I know none of this. I myself need training on this. My SLT needs training on this. My DSL needs training on this. And all my teachers need training on this. And I think we've got to do this. And I would love to tour schools where digital safeguarding and digital awareness is embedded across the curriculum. I'd love to walk into a geography lesson and see, maybe AI videos and AI photos being deciphered. I'd love to go into history and see misinformation, disinformation being tackled from what people post on social media about events in history. I'd love to go into politics, of course, but I'd love to go into science. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'd love to see how science might be able to embed digital safeguarding into their curriculum. I'd love to see it in all subjects. So it's not just a kind of, oh gosh, it's e-safety week next week. The SLT member responsible for CPD needs to quickly put something together and get a speaker in and get an assembly done for the whole school. I want to see it as a constant kind of piece of education. I'd love to see schools with podcasts. I'd love to see schools with digital safeguarding newsletters. I'd love to see innovation in this space. I'd love to see digital designated safeguarding leads in every school. So I think there are things that we can do. We've got to be innovative as leaders. We've got to be brave as leaders. We've got to see this as a massive priority. This, for me, is more of a priority than your exam results. It's more of a priority than not having even a maths teacher. I think because student well-being is the number one priority, and having all stakeholders engaged in that from a digital point of view, teachers, SLT, parents, the young people themselves, I think is really important.
Okay. I mean, we could talk to you for hours. We really could, because it's just such a fascinating subject. And I think it's going to really resonate. I'd just like to thank you for helping get this message out there into the education world and to the wider world so that we can safeguard children more effectively against the digital world. So thank you so much.
No, it's been my pleasure. And if anybody listening wants to access any of the resources that I put out there or wants to speak to me about supporting your environment, then my website is forworkingparents.com. My LinkedIn is at Amit Singh Kalley, and Instagram, Facebook at forworkingparents.
If any of you have integrated AI and technology into the curriculum like Amit's just said he'd like to see, contact him, invite him into your school so he can actually see that.
This has been Being the Head, the human cost of leading schools. We see you, we hear you, and we'll see you next time.